I'm an architect for many, many years. I joined Hadid when I was still a student here in London. So I grew up in a relatively provincial part of Germany. And then as a teenager, I moved to Stuttgart, and there I started also architecture, but only after I've done some studying of philosophy and mathematics in Bonn, where I was originally growing up. And so architecture was, through modernism, I kind of fell in love with it. I mean, already as a teenager, we worked at Mies van der Rohe, Oscar Niemeyer, etc. I was aware of. And also then in Stuttgart, I got some great lectures explaining there was still modern hardcore modernists there. And I learned about postmodernism, which was the hot new thing in the early 80s. And I also became aware of Hadid's work, so publications which came out in the mid-80s. And so I grabbed the opportunity to go to London on an exchange program as a student. So I was in 1987. It was quite cool. It was a nice group, a lot of Germans. Half of the course was Germans, and they had a great teacher. His name is Kevin Roberton, who was part of that emergence, what then was called deconstructors the following year. It's called the New Spirit in Architecture. There was an architectural review. So he was also kind of edging towards that, and he was in that publication with some of the other protagonists of what was later when it became deconstructivism. So that prepared me for Zaha's office. So I met her at Tate in London, where they had a conference on deconstructivism. Actually, Mark Wrigley came over with all of the protagonists were speaking, plus Charles Jenks, and so Zaha was speaking as well. And I loved her. I knew her a lot, but her personality, I loved the way she came across, very frank, very honest. Not a lot of this kind of showing off bullshit she gets from all the others, frankly speaking, and the way they were kind of hitting at each other. And she felt quite genuine. So I knocked on the door of a little studio, and she wasn't there, but I was interviewed and hired. And it was a very small studio because we did competitions mostly. Most of them lost, obviously, although she had won some major competitions. It didn't happen. But soon, in the next year, we got the Heathrow Fire Station, and we got some other larger opportunities, which didn't happen. So she had only like a handful of employees, and I was still a student. And then I got a bit of breathing space. So at a certain point, I realized I have to finish my degree. So I just went back for half a year to all I have learned at Zaha after having worked for 2 years, many competitions. It was easy, rapid, and very successful that I finished my diploma project, immediately came back. And then some of the most senior people had left. And I established kind of good rapport with Zaha, and we started to get them all very well and build a company together. Slowly over the 90s, mostly lost competitions. And then the big takeoff started in the late 90s with major women's likes, sort of, Maxi, Rose, Cincinnati, Peter Bear Center, Wolfsburg Science Center, all around in 1 year. And then it started kind of to take off. Philosophy started with philosophy of science, logic, which brought me closer to computer science as well, foundation of mathematics, etc. And then it also developed my interest in sociology, political economy, so political philosophy, etc., and the social sciences. And that helped me to think of architecture in terms of societal progress, the role the built environment and a disciplined architecture can play in upgrading the built environment, innovating and evolving along with societal progress, in particular also in terms of economic restructuring, which was kind of happening, obviously, in the period of very strongly in the 80s and 90s. And then ever since as well, in terms of what I was a Marxist originally, this whole debate about post-Fordism and post-Fordist restructuring was quite fascinating to me, which came along with a lot of privatization, but also with, complete concentration on urban centers, which was then called the urban renaissance, and breaking up the big, I'd say, vertically integrated concerns and large corporations on the greenfield, this whole suburbanization process that flowed back into the cities, and deconstructivism was connected to this, but also postmodernism actually was anticipating this and connected to this, and modernism was on the way out because it was aligned to all the socioeconomic era of Fordism, the way the Marxists of the 80s and 90s theorized it. So that awareness and understanding historical developments and seeing that what we were interested in, this new level of complexity and contingency, agglomerating spaces, structures, old over new, etc., layering simultaneity of interactions and processes and audiences, instead of this kind of neat separation and repetition of something very highly kind of long-term order, which was the paradigm of mechanical mass production. I realized that, of course, it had to do with a microelectronic revolution and telecommunication revolution. And yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, London is a symbol of this because London was kind of declining. Britain was declining in that kind of post-war era, and it became kind of quasi-socialist and was affected by the problems of socialist reproduction with all these nationalized economies. And then when Thatcher came in, together with the Thatcher-Reagan revolution, he got this enormous redynamization of London as a place of entrepreneurship, and the city started growing again, and it's been ever since the fastest growing city of Europe. And you had all these kind of dynamism of private companies and the layering into the historic center. And that was actually fascinating to be the part of and theorize and understand that the kind of architecture we're doing fits well with that. So that's where the philosophical or sociology and social science and economics background helps me to give confidence to our strategies, also forms of urbanism we're promoting, and the kinds of projects we're seeking out and how we develop them, and also the embrace of new technology and innovation, this here forward-looking, these themes. And then also to theorize again the discipline of architecture. What are the core competencies? What are we contributing to the built environment? And what are the categories of the history of architecture, the way I've been built up, how they can be upgraded or validated with my idea of the epochal styles, aligning with socioeconomic epochs, and analyzing the history of the, for instance, 19th or 20th century. And I saw these aesthetic revolutions and the emergence of modernism, for instance, through transitional styles like Art Nouveau and Expressionism, and then the way what happened in the 20th century through towards the end of modernism in the 60s, 70s into the 80s, the way we had these transitional styles of postmodernism and deconstructivism, and that there should be a new convergence and sort of restabilization of an architectural, that's a stylistic paradigm. It isn't just the look and feel of things, but methodologically grounded in understanding of the way social programs should be interpreted, which led me to this kind of the formulation of this idea of the epochal style of characteristicism. And then it has, since then I realized it has a series of subsidiary styles like tectonism. So this kind of grand narrative, like no grand overview and understanding the historical process, being on the right side of history of what they're doing, and defending that, understanding the rationality of what we're doing, which seems at times is misinterpreted as willful, as seeking spectacle, etc. And to counter that, with understanding the deeper rationality, historical rationality, social functionality, advantages, and rationality advantages of the methodology of the expansion of the repertoire, which is a formal repertoire, but this is a problem-solving repertoire because we solve problems through form, through spatial structures and morphological articulation, and interested also in how things are not only laid out and objectively allowing for proximities and interactions, but how important it is also that these proximities are legible, so that they become that we empower end users to grasp or understand a much more complex environment. Maybe that was trivial in very simple environments, but as we layer in and build up a complex metropolis, the question of legibility, navigation, orientation, recognition of what belongs together or what is where. Also, when we're coming into situations where we are not always already familiar with the spaces and complexes and campuses, etc., they're too big, and we're always coming to new places. So we're relying on intuitive grasp. And so these kind of themes, I would say they're coming, obviously, I'm bringing into the disciplines with a systematic overview and trying to speak for the discipline. And of course, not inventing movements, just as the movement of parallelism was a broad-based movement with many contributors, and the intuitive grasp of using the design systems and the use of algorithm and what we can do with it, but understanding that what we intuitively wanted to do with this was already what the architects trying to kind of get at, the instance layer of the new levels of complexity and new levels of connecting spaces, that this was driven by an underlying set of success criteria for new formations. And then as we then develop these tools and repertoires, which were totally different from all traditional architecture, but as we were handling them, and they have a wider spectrum of, let's say, some wider toolbox, but then we're solving problems where we solve the conditions of a particular site with a complex program, which has to allocate and you have to make legible. Then we realized that this wider repertoire was instrumentalizable in very kind of effective ways, and then to reflect that and defend that, I saw my task, because that was not necessarily the forte of many of the contributors who were more intuitive in love with the new morphologies, and they became new tropes, also, given to us by new kind of software packages and tools. And it's just as the intuitive love for this. And I saw my role of defending that on a rational basis, and that making us accountable for why we're desiring this, what are the advantages. And it's interesting that, and a lot of clients and audience find this quite appealing. And that is not just the kind of, that I think there must be a deeper sense also of that. The audience is understanding this sound good, because they project the life they might be able to lead in there. This has been my big contribution. I'm also it was considered in my time a talented designer, and now I'm kind of have an eye in steering people. But my kind of more unique contribution as a theorist of architecture, who's kind of in the weeds, trying to apply what I've learned and theorize what we're doing. I definitely am happy, and it should be such that you recognize a project as being a project of parametricism, or now a bit rarer and harder to achieve tectonism. I'm less happy if you put your finger and say, this is a Hadid project. If that was a kind of subset where it would be the recognizability would be probably owed to a particular history and constraints and ways of working we bring to this larger movement, which maybe I cannot so easily account for and theorize. What I'm fully accounting for is all the principles, what I call heuristics and aesthetic values, which guide us with respect to parametricism, and now in an upgraded, deepened version of tectonism. Yes, and that we shouldn't be surprised that you also kind of perceive that. But Zaha, Hadid, we don't want to be so easy to recognize. What it means there's too much repetition. It's difficult to overcome. Everybody would be somehow recognizable because of our history, our particular ways of doing things, particular limitations ultimately. However much we want to expand our repertoires, every architect have their own particular subset, and that we should want to transcend that. And not be so easily recognizable. So, of course, it's difficult if the movement had many protagonists. We were the ones who were staying the course and grew larger, whereas the environment, this movement didn't become universalized and generalized. And that's why a lot of what we're becoming the kind of a heavyweight in the field of parametric design and parametricism, particularly when it comes to build projects and large build projects. I mean, there are many. There are others. I would say, for instance, Shenzhen Airport is a work of parametricism, SOM, Mumbai Airport. So we recognize others being in there also as major works, quite a few others as well, but here in Studio and Lava Architects and so on and so forth. There are many, but we are maybe the most prominent. And that's why there's this kind of passport total where this becomes standard. If it's to that extent that everything parametricism is kind of thought to be kind of Zaha style, then it's less constraining. That is just a kind of symbol for the overall. But ultimately, the more particular Zaha recognizability, I would find to be problematic, not something we seek, and we don't want clients to just have too many preconceptions of that they want something similar to what we've done before. I mean, there is similarity. We're also trying to push forward and have some new tools, new ideas, new translations to expand further repertoire. That's what we're aiming for. And we think we have a very large catalog of diverse morphologies, concepts, approaches. But what ties them all together is that they are never violating the principles of parametricism, or now in the future, hopefully more and more tectonism. And when it comes to AI, it's fascinating. I feel quite redeemed and rewarded, and I observe with this pleasure that not only that we, because there's so many images out there that we can with good conscience use AI, using our own, let's say, prompts, our own name in the prompts, and then mixing with others, by Otto perhaps, or other people we love. I'm not adverse to this, because whether we're using AI or other means of getting closer to the genius of Freud, or to that shouldn't matter. And the IP and copyright issues hopefully don't get in the way of this wonderful blossoming. But I think so. What I love is that if you Google it without any bias, AI architecture, parametricism dominates. Whereas in the world of the built environment, not at all. There are major works, but it's a drop in the ocean. Even something like the Zine Award, where was juror recently, there's nothing of parametricism. And then you go AI, and it's everywhere, in particular those who promote it and tutor it. And if you look what images they choose or the works they have on their websites or as key, it all matters. And so I gave a lecture recently about this, tracing this a little bit. I would say it's about 75% of the works are, and minimalism is much, much smaller, and postmodernism is hardly there. It makes sense because that's what it's a young generation. Maybe that's what they really would like to do. Maybe there's a bias by now in maturity. I don't know. I feel like this too, inbuilt somehow, and that's great. I mean, that for me portends the future. That this signals to me that pragmatism is the epochal style which will come through. And obviously these images are just images, but the similar experience with respect to the metaverse. Metaverse architecture is also way more oriented towards pragmatism than in the built environment at large or in any other. If you had to kind of survey, architectural magazines, what is carrying the day with sterling prices or whatever. It's way more in these kind of new domains, and that gives me a lot of hope. And I love that fact. And we use AI a lot to proliferate, but we systematizing as well. We're training our own archives into subsidiary networks and to stay with a few. And for each project, you make special networks to hone in on something, and we're developing special tools and I think that the discipline should do that. These, great journeys for artists, for graphic designers, for products, for fantasy novels, for that. So we can use it as wonderful, but we should also generate our own versions and discipline and frame them and build interfaces which make our work feed into our workflow. But I think there's an enormous productivity potential and expansion of creativity, which I see. So I think I'm quite thrilled by this, and because I think it will help bring pragmatism forward, because it's not that we get a lot of competition. I embrace that. I mean, it keeps us on our toes, if you like, and I'm not regretful to it. And of course that there's a lot of at the fringes, there's also a lot of nonsense being generated, or kitsch, if you like. But this is the overall feeling I have is one of being thrilled. Yes, I mean, we've always done that. I mean, that's been the story of pragmatism from the very beginning, where starting we was sublines and murmurs and blogs and particle systems and all these things coming out of the computer graphics and animation industry, as well as all the science, simulation, fluid dynamics, etc. So these tools are very important. You get really intricate and coherent and intense geometries and spatialities, which you couldn't do otherwise. Or you could try, but you would kill yourself by hand. I mean, we tried interesting things, doing these gradients and dotting things, and and having complex curvature with ship curves. And I mean, obviously that's maybe we generated a desire, which instantly meant that when these tools came out, we were jumping on them, like what we've been looking for. Because it's not, bringing cold computer graphics or animation of hair dynamics and wind and smoke to it. It could have been architecture would have been absolutely blind to us and ignore that if it hadn't already was striving for some morphologies like this, where we, for instance, looked at landscape formations, river flows, and the way the forest might kind of peter out, and these kind of density gradients and soft transitions. We were already looking at these things before the tools, working with paint and fading effects and so on. And then overlaying things. That I think that made the discipline was highly sensitized to import that. And what I remember of the period when that happened in the early 90s, and it was actually within 1 year. I was teaching at Columbia in 93 with Zaha, and that just had published that year the AD Falling in Architecture. The year before was a similar assemblage article from Greg Lynn, and then it was Kippers and Greg and Amistad Allen writing. And we were all teaching at Columbia, and there were so many people who were doing other stuff. And there was a convergence of a whole generation very quickly. The fact that also OMA with, let's say, Fascista Alejandro being full on, and then from Berkel being shifted into this, and Hani Rashid. I mean, they weren't green. They had done work before, but it was a so rapid conversion. If you weren't there, you wouldn't have noticed who was first out of the gate. And I have to say, and also Lars Spyberg and Greg Lynn and Jesse Reiser, these were the protagonists, particularly also for writing. So no matter what they were doing, whether this was so great or not, you could question that. But delivering, the concepts and categories and agendas where we could recognize what we were doing. Yeah. So that voiceover, that new vocabulary, which came from Greg and Jeff, and not only the tools, these categories, these concepts, they also came out of Deleuze and Guattari, partly, smooth days, also methodology, the abstract machine, the fold, and such. That was very critical, and so it enhanced certain features in our work, which were there. That's why we were so sensitized and jumping on it. But then it also accelerates. So there's an interesting dialectic between design practice and theory, which is at that point only a new set of terms to describe forms and formal structures and values. So would be intense coherence as something which would be interesting and valuable, and distinguish itself from kind of a coherence which was monotonous and serial, and some kind of incoherence which was collage, and so you had kind of modernism interjected as well as postmodernism, deconstructism, and it was this kind of the third thing. And so it was this kind of theory, and then for me, that as a pure, just, let's say, formal research and formal compositional vocabulary was doing a lot of work, and from America, but we also needed some the kind of societal dynamic, and it was, will be very clear, because when you particular, interestingly, in the what I was talking about post-Fordism, so flattening of hierarchies, the blurring of boundaries, matrix organization where you have layered things and multiple affiliations was Greg's term in terms of the building, but you had also multiple affiliations in networks of companies or within departments within companies or individuals belonging to several companies to different degrees. And then, in mathematics, you have you from set theory to fuzzy sets, and suddenly that is richer and you can have more relationships articulated. So there's this kind of, and then this whole, then you realize, all these wonderful concepts coming of complexity sciences, chaos theory, and so on. And so that was an exciting, and then you also find, older works like Das Thompson, Gross and Form, which were going to, and then we suddenly making sense of South of Plato's, Deleuze and Guattari. And they were talking about, and that was interesting, they were abstracting social evolutionary formations and kind of a sociology into kind of a geometry, the nomadic tribal structures and the way they engage with a landscape which wasn't treated, dissected. It was discovered through a line which opens up a space through intensities rather than through extents of conditions. there was a whole kind of interest where I thought that my role was, and also at DRL, when I founded DRL, to foreground the socioeconomic out of the, let's say, socioeconomic literally, but also out of the corporate organization theory and management theory, where you have things like the network organization, the blurring of boundaries, and the dynamization of interactions and so on and so forth. What would the space, for that look like? And then when Jeff was showing the School of Fish, I was immediately thinking of swarms of tables, swarms of lighting grids, and you had in the 70s, you had these Bürolandschaft, which was literally created in territory by the way, the density and orientation of tables and chairs in a field. And to connect it this way, and that this emerges of the open Bürolandschaft, which has these kind of gradient and multiple conditions and field conditions, that suddenly made sense, because these are the arenas of, let's say, business organization. They certainly don't fall in love with abstract art for the sake of the thrill of it. If certain morphological formations emerge there, and so this concept makes sense there and enhance what they're trying to grapple with, and then that shows a congeniality, basically. I mean, the historical congeniality with the historical tendencies, which are critical. And I believe that the productivity gains is really where society moves forward. And I believe that all our lifestyle and patterns of life, social life patterns and mobility conditions and family dissolutions, etc., they follow basically where the productivity gains are. If a certain way of existing and living in an urban environment and moving between different spaces, because you consult and work in many conditions, etc., the productivity gains is what shape life. And that's why I was so interested in corporate organization and the business life as the vanguard of societal historic transformations, and they shape the city, and not what people like. They like what makes them productive, because that just that's just the material. That's the kind of Marxism, historical materialism. And that's why also there's interest always in corporate structures and working for. At the DRL, we had these programs of combat fields, and we had the BMW project and others we tried for, and I would have loved to be Google Campus, etc. But it also affects other components, of course, of the city, the whole idea, and being interested in urbanism. It connects all to that. So that was more we did a lot of formal research, and we did our linguistic development, and I love and defend formal research. But within that, I'm kind of d'accord with sort of like Jeff Kipnis and Peter Eisman, who say that's all there is, and they want to kind of shield their work from any pressure of functioning in the world of business, economics, and so on and so forth, social functionality. So I think I understand why they shield it, so they're more free in their explorations, but ultimately it's a fallacy. So my view was we have to endorse it. And why we endorse it? Because this formal research delivers a new, not only formal repertoire, but a problem-solving repertoire for new types of problems, which have to do with generating complexity, but also maintaining legibility in the face of complexity. So that's where I see my historical role in that movement, focusing on social functionality. That's why I published these big books, which got some reception, but I'm not sure how much they were, read and understood. And then I came back with Hermetism 2.0, emphasizing that further. By that time, Hermetism had to already evolve into tectonism to some extent, and I started to use that phrase also. And it's just now I published tectonism to say, okay, that's the movement, and it's great. It has all these protagonists, and they've matured. They all went from early pragmatism into tectonism. And there was this huge investment in fabrication and robotics and all the schools of architecture, developing that and starting to build. And so this is all wonderful, but it's still lacking the direction. And what I bring to this under my heading of tectonism is the semiological project and the project of articulation. And that what this new world of highly intricate and rational families of tectonic systems and fabrication logics and structural systems, what is lovely about them, there's a much richer palette to articulate a even more complex world compared to the previous pragmatism, where you had gradients and but everything was this kind of white or gray single surface, and maybe a swarm here, a swarm there. But it was and mostly NURB surfaces and Maya modeling, and maybe a few tessellations thrown in, but less. The world of tecton was so much richer because it has so much more rationality. It brings in all these wonderful engineering logics, and the engineering disciplines have fully embraced, of course, algorithmic working simulations. And the results of any of these algorithms is never a minimalist composition. So we know that minimalism is fallacious and cannot absorb that. And that's for everybody the easiest to understand. All the engineering rationality and efficiencies are lost in the world of modernism or minimalism. But also, and that's what the social functionality actually is. When we're saying that we cannot think of social functionality by a list of schedule of accommodation where a certain number of square meters allocated to a certain function, which you can then put in a box and place next to each other. We need to think of the way institutions function as primarily variable event scenarios. We need to bring them into the model, not as labels, a simple set of categories, which are, a territory A labeled foyer, and territory B labeled canteen, etc. And then here, if I was saying labeled office space, and that wouldn't work. So we say we bring the functions, the simulating, and bring them into the model from day one. This is the agent-based simulations we're doing, the life process or occupancy simulations, and to shape interaction processes, framing societal and social interaction. That's really what the final definition of the architect's an architectural task is. That could be urban framing and urban spaces, and as well as in interior conditions. And to do that well, we need to have a more subtle and dynamic representation of the functions we're trying to serve in the model. And that's what I'm promoting. So I'm saying something like a proper architectural model when exploring the organization of the space, but also the phenomenological kind of articulation of the space and the somological encoding when the crowd or actors move from one space to another, they change their mode of interaction. They're moving to some new social protocols which start to be activated when you move from a public plaza into a private foyer, depending how private it is, and then you move into a zone which is maybe more intimate and carpeted, and there are different modes of engagement, and they're encoded in the built environment through, atmospheric markers and through semiology. And I think there's a congeniality that the wonderful diversity of repertoires coming through tectonism, the richness of materiality and articulation and so on, and give me those wonderful families which are distinct, yet they're kind of similar, and you have hermetic variation in each of them. And for that, I use that to do that articulated text which empowers and structures social interactions. And then, of course, also responsively, there might be there's also interaction design where you switch on the light, or you open some doors, and you shift some paradigms or partitions. That's another project. And I usually use the schools of architecture to develop them over a number of years, and then go into maybe PhDs, and then go into research teams, and then hopefully getting large clients we can convince and bring it out into the real world. That's the trajectory. It takes 10, 15 years, some of these innovations to arrive in the built environment. And that's where I see my role. So tectonism on the one hand charts a fantastic emergent a movement which is there, which has its conferences, which has its publications, which has its smaller, medium, and now larger scale projects. But I'm adding another ambition to that, and connecting it up with this ambition of social structural semiology, for instance. So that would be what tectonism should become, and what I mean by it when I'm promoting it. And it's difficult because usually it's in the real world to have such, also for the simulations we have some projects where we did it, but maybe we didn't win this. We did it, for instance, for Sberbank Interiors, which were even wonderful. These massive floor plates, thousands of people on the floor plate, and then 10,000 or more in a building where even floor plates are connected, and to simulate that and have special ideas about how you structure this by elevating, for instance, corridors, et cetera, or trajectories. These are wonderful projects. They didn't happen, so I'm still on it. I mean, these are, and the books and writings are to excite more collaborators, and that takes time, but it's I'm in the middle of that. Let's put it this way. And sometimes it's one would have wished or thought it was quicker, and then sometimes it comes like an avalanche. For instance, 10 years of waiting for parametricism, and now I'm feeling it will happen with AI. Yeah, of course. I mean, Zaha, of course, it was. I learned so much. It was amazing to see those incredible inventiveness. And I've done some interesting. I wrote Digital Hadid, where and some other articles about how amazing innovations, what the underlying rationality was or could be, where she with free calligraphic hand, that it had order and pulse, but it wasn't a park, and could capture more, which later on became the kind of splice, for instance, that you could have that as an architectural proposition, or this idea of the landscape analogy, so these kind of flowing, soft transformations. She had also early on, she had fading effects and pointillistic dot, these kind of washing out from black to white. There are so many things in there, but also strange distortions, using perspectival distortions on the geometry, not as only a representation, but as, the geometric, you could kind of grab many elements and put them into some kind of force field. For her, this was not a magnetic field like what Malfoy has used, but these were kind of perspectival force fields. So that was very important. And that kind of audacity and conviction. But of course, again, I think without then Kitmas helping me to put a voice over and a concept onto this. And then somebody like Rem, who I admire, and the way he's always understanding societal transformations out there. This idea of retroactive manifesto is looking at what crops up, what happens despite of preoccupations of, let's say, the architectural elite. These are very important influences for me. And of course, then it's more than that. Reading, and of course, I was absorbing the work of Le Corbusier also through his writings. And these were milestones, of course, as well as Colin Rowe, and also somebody like Venturi, Complexity and Contradiction. These kind of milestones everybody should be reading to understand the discipline. But really understanding deeply how they've contributed, and that I'm still living on that. And let's say a concept like the complex whole from Venturi is still being picked up by Greg productively, and I'm still want to carry that forward as an ambition. So there's definitely, but also similarly like Kevin Minch and the emphasis on legibility and the image of the city and so on. There's many influences and resources, whether they're personally engaged with. Of course, it's lovely if you're personally engaged, like you work with somebody at Zaha, or you go, of course, to lectures and have debates and conversations. People like Rem Koolhaas or Peter Eisenman, Greg Lynn, Jesse Reiser, Jeff Kippers a lot. I mean, I've stepped in his footsteps. AADR in sense, kind of Jeff started something like that, and we scaled it up and made it a proper accredited course, and obviously have our own agenda on top. But I was observing what he was doing closely at the in the early 90s, and I loved it, and he was there, and I visited, and he came to the office, and we had conversations. So he was a great influence, of course. And but also, people like Lars Beiberg bringing. I mean, I was a student of AutoHead, but I didn't connect so much at the time. And then as Lars brought Auto onto the let's say emerging car medicine paradigm, and I was again electrified. Everybody means this. Yes, of course, that's what we should look at and start to do and work like. So he was great. So these are the early influences, and somebody like Mark Burry, he just recently has been here and looking at his work, what he's done at Suburban. I mean, it was very important. There's so many Mark Menges, and we were obviously in conversations, whether it was at the AA, and then a lot of them went to Harvard, and we kept going there, and to be teaching in these places and having conversations with protagonists, also Scott Cohen, Preston Scott Cohen, and when I was teaching at GSD, we had literally daily 6 hours conversations minimum. So that's where you gain a lot. And recently, of course, out of our own student body, Shajib Bhushan, we should maybe also he's amazing. He's came out of ADRL, is leading the competition design group here, and there's many great talents. And he's also a great thinker and writer, and we in conversation a lot about developing things further, like the metaverse we're both invested in. And so these are great influences. We nobody's living in a vacuum without. Yeah, I mean, it was actually in it was 96. Jeff had left that group, which he called the Graphic Design Group. It was on Baron Chadel left with Michael Hensel, who we also became very close, and I think is very strong. But this unit didn't work so well, but Ram wasn't there much to understand, and he was also had some troubles. So Moisen, who had seen me, I was teaching at Harvard, and so at Columbia in 93, and then at GSD where he came to the final reviews at Columbia, where we had great result, and we also started to use computational physics with a very interesting layered pragmatic urbanism already. And then I was teaching at GSD, and we did really strong results. That's why I actually stayed for several weeks, where I met with Daniel Scherer and Preston Scott Cohen, and I was working very a lot with the students, and we got great results. So when he came to the AA the following year, he realized that it might be a good idea to let me do that together with Brett. He also working with us at Zaha, and he was also at GSD. Actually, Moisten saw him at a kind of review of Columbia, where he was just in Kakatamaitan, brought him to GSD, and then the two of us, we were founding DRL, and it was from the very beginning. It was it was the idea of you had the paperless studio at Columbia in 94 or something, but we had both everything based on computers and kind of model making a la Frei Otto
form finding experiments with materials and so on. That was always the thing. And then translating these into digital tools. But from the very beginning, we also had the strong thing of that we had to have good programmatic agendas and give it societal meaning. That this was representing progressive societal tendencies. That was my big thing. So, and that was trying to write and teach seminars, both on the formal repertoires and all the text of the guys we were talking about to this theory, but then also brought in the post-Fordism discourse, socioeconomic discourse, management theory. So I'm making seminars where I was pairing up a formalist or architectural form-making article with a, let's say, business sociology article. That was the founding idea of, because also for the American formalists, they were at war with the Dutch, programmatic, who had dismissed form and, Winnie-Mass, Datascape, REM, and they thought it's all about the content and then social conditions, etc., etc. And I always saw this kind of, no, we have to synthesize them. We new program, cross-programming and all that is also came with Schumi, that you shouldn't do that only with boxes, It was interesting. So for me, this was a synthesis in London between the US and the radical functionalists of the Dutch school with the radical formalists, which I thought was equally one-sided, and making a complete architectural school, which was obviously these are one-sided, and in the sense as propedeutic and kind of research to get somewhere on each of these sides is maybe good, but they can't deliver. So bring them together. So I was more a synthesizer than an originator. So I recognized formal genius Zaha, the formalist vocabulary in Greg and Jeff, some of the sensitizing the social conditioning from REM, etc. And I seem a great sponge and synthesizer who would put it together and make it compelling. And also having more resource brought into it from my socioeconomic kind of studies. So sad, and it's a shame that, we of course, buildings take a long time, so we're still completing some of those works she was partly initiating. Many have been completed already, but we had, when the time she passed away, we've grown a little bit since, I think, but at the time we were already like over 400. Now we packed on another 100 people, so it's not the big ship. And it just, we survived it all. Was I'm grateful to all the clients and that we got new projects, and that everybody stayed on. Nobody was allowed themselves to be headhunted, even though we have a tough period of forming and independence. So they were all right very well, but I think we were well established with our organization, with the different departments, and we had established this unique kind of what we call the Z cluster, where we have a lot of front-end designers coming together. We already had the computational design group. These things have been growing, and we had more research groups now. But it's not with something where there was a kind of dramatic transformation. So the dramatic transformation of this company was, there were two steps. One was the mid-90s into kind of or early 90s into computational design. And then the second one was getting first successes around 2000. Well, the third one, which was the crazy era of the boom, Dubai and all over Europe. The whole 2006, 7, 8, these few years that's where we jumped and scaled. And
which we never had to kind of cut back on. That was great transformation. So these had happened. But 2016, we survived, the big crash of 2008-9, the European debt crisis. We had survived the Arab Spring, and we were still over 400 people. So we were, and it was a big China story started to emerge, and that continues. So there's nothing dramatic. You could say COVID was a challenge, an interesting challenge, and that maybe is the biggest transformation, that we now work so differently, with working so much more without reach, which without so much travel, and we're not being here every day necessarily, but that's not as dramatic. So I feel that it's just keep rolling out more and evolving additional capacity, maturing further the firm, but no dramatic further transformation. So it's interesting. So obviously it was a good scavenge. We lost her and so on, but it didn't shake us up. We were able to continue more or less as we had been. Because when Zaha was there, we would do everything together. So I could kind of feel it. Of course, she was a larger-than-life figure, like, Frank Gehry. And the difference is that she didn't monopolize, all the work. I mean, she got all the attention, but she's very much letting the teams and the many creatives join in and create. So that's why we're more versatile. We have more repertoire, more diversity of approach than maybe Frank or even Wolf with other figures, or even another one that was similar is Carl Trauer. They depend more on this one person, I feel, than we hear in the actual process. Not that I know these other processes, but looking at the work and the outcome, I know it from some that they don't let others design. So, and really, that was different. But the other thing is that we were double at, made us more robust, I think. And there's a slight different character to this company, with all this kind of research element and the PhDs and the writings, which are not coming out of, let's say, in offices or or Frank Gehry. It also attracts a lot of good talent. In that sense, it's more like OMA, where you have all these, lecturers and writers, and Ramsworth, and also you have Ranier and others. I mean, they lost some great figures, like Vidi and Biaki and many others. But so I think we're different in the sense it's like it's kind of a merger of a Gehry and the OMA, right? So because it's a double act, and that makes it special, I think. So they have we have that other strand. And that's also the way I said, the OMA works very much conceptual content, that maybe they would write a script mainly, and they're thinking about the process and the events, the way they work on mobile, for instance, exemplary. So we have that aspect to some extent as well. And we have the great formalist. So that's why I think we're stronger. There's kind of this shouldn't mix, but we hit it off. So, and then you have, so we are kind of a synthesis, and we didn't bleed off all the great talents. OMA mostly attracted more talent to begin with, but they left, and also, like in studio where Tobias left and did his own. I mean, we had a long conversation whether he should stay and on why he's staying there. Should I stay with super fans? So for me it was clear that I wanted to, this is really great
synthesis, and Zaha contributed so much I couldn't have done. And but also her role as, her role. She did what she had to do to set it off, and and it's also there's periods, historical periods. I think the 80s were the period of the great kind of aesthetic revolutions, paradigm revolutions into the 90s, and they need these characters, and that's where all these characters, like before, they're big revolutionaries, transition people, the great mavericks, you can call a lot of good Gary and Proust, Tom Nain, and they're very strong and intuitive, and they're making big transformations. And I don't think it's this era. There's an era out of consolidating and drawing the conclusions and applying and rolling out and refining further, which is a different mindset. It's more, where you bring in science, you bring in, technology, you bring in sociology, which is the great revolutionary mavericks. They can't execute their own vision. So that's, I think also that's why in a sense, that part we can do without that. Oh, of course. I mean, there's some great, one thing I'm very much excited about is the metaverse. And I say it's 100% within the domain of architecture and the design disciplines in more general, that virtual media and spaces and framing social communication and social interaction is the headline of all design disciplines, including fashion design, graphic design, furniture and product design, but also particularly architecture. And that happens as much in virtual spaces as it happens in physical spaces. And there's also going to be a connection, and we're well placed to do it. And what I expect of virtual space or metaverse situations, they're directly competing with physical space or become symbiotic and hybrid events, etc. But we expect the same contribution to societal communication in many ways. So, and there's a one-to-one, I think, translation and application of all the key categories should structure our ambition with a similar success criteria. At a total swap out of the engineering group finds, but the design ambitions and design criteria of good design, whether you can bring things together in close proximity, so that you need to have a complexity and many things are at a fingertip, but they must be legible. You need to empower users to quickly find a way to switch from one condition to another quickly, and to grasp and understand the atmosphere and what's expected and who to expect. So you don't have to go into a space which has nothing for you, where you would be a kind of elephant in the glass shop or whatever. So all of that I can see in the metaverse we've built, and while we're using it, that our way of working and our way of designing delivers, and we really doing a good, well-functioning virtual space of communication, of exhibition, of interaction, of et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I'm excited about, and I think there will be an avalanche of work, and we shouldn't. It's non-trivial, and there will also be aesthetic sensibilities. We have to articulate properly, and there will be very similar social functionality constraints and conditions, because we're trying to do similar things. Whether you organize a conference center and hosting a conference, if we want to achieve very similar things, whether we're doing them in a physical space or in a virtual space. Same with an exhibition. And then did you think about the opening events as well as individual engagement with objects? And we have our exhibitions in recent years. We always have them both physically and virtual. Any of such events, school, virtual college the many universities, we have lots of, so I'm just setting some of these themes with also with students. And I did metaverse urbanism last time because I don't only believe that we have isolated virtual spaces, but that will agglomerate into cityscapes where you have co-location synergies. Like, there will be certain districts with certain affinities where you want to be part of something and share footfall and be quickly going to several venues hosted by different clients, and how they come together. All these are fascinating themes, and I believe that the metaverse will bring some of the themes which I've been pushing, and they're slow to be executed, like responsive environment or kinetically transformable, adaptable environments. They will be in the metaverse first, and then when we learn how to do them effectively, they will migrate into the real world, I would say. And other things like, for instance, urbanism ideas I had about multi-author urbanism, where you have at the same time that urban district isn't falling apart into some kind of what I call garbage store urbanization, where you just have an agglomeration of disparate and distinct and disconnected, uncoordinated objects. That I'm trying this in my metaverse. I will try to do the urbanism where the ethos is of mutual affiliation, embedding, resonances, picking up themes, not designing isolated, and generating trajectories and gradients and atmospheres. And so a lot of themes which I have been thinking about. For instance, in the real world, it's hard I would love to get a big master plan under my wing and then curate all the sites and who's doing what and giving them more degrees of freedom than many planning systems allow. But in the metaverse, with some authoring, I can do all of that. I can overcome all these horrendous planning constraints and this random selection of architects out of a pool, out of a discipline which is totally fragmented, where you have the neo-postmodernists doing stuff, and the neo-minimalists and the neo-rationalists and historicists, and you have it's totally discoordinated. And so you can never generate something which has an urban structure and logic. But we can do it in the metaverse. And I think once it becomes, and as pragmatism's tectonism will also becomes through that, a kind of, like it was in the 50s, where modernism was a shared, best practice, which was very healthy for an architectural culture. We will reach that, and I think the metaverse will be a great conduit for achieving that.